Okay, according to Verizon, it is 8:30. So we will proceed with the meeting. Bruce, do you have some announcements?
Yes, I don't have my little script in front of me, so I'm going to do this by memory. But so we are doing this by webinar, and our official record is on the audio. So if anyone talks, they have to have their microphone on. We'd appreciate it if you do talk, that you introduce yourself and the company you're with, so we have that for the record. On the webinar, all the lines are muted right now. So if you want to ask a question, you can do that by typing it into your webinar comment section, or just by unmuting your line, which is *2. That usually takes just a second in order to take effect. So do that and then try to get our attention. And I think as far as feel free to get up, and the bathrooms are down the hallway. You'll see the signs for those. And I think that's it.
All right, thank you, Bruce. Next, we'll do introductions. I want to point out there is a sign-in sheet. Where is that, Mary? It's being passed around, so please sign in. So next, we'd like to do introductions. We'll do the board, and then the audience who's here in person, and then all those people who are on the webinar. So I'm Pat Melby, board chair from Helena. We'll go to where they're at.
Greg Gould, counsel from Helena.
Bruce Prensall, I'm the executive director for the board.
Sheila Rice, member of the board from Great Falls.
Bob Goach, board member from Ronan. Johnny McCluskey, board member from Billings.
Amber Parrish, board member Billings. Jeanette McKee, board member Hamilton.
Mary, would you go ahead with pass the mic around, please?
Mary Bear, multifamily program manager, Montana Housing.
Cheryl Cohen, operations manager, Montana Housing. Mary Palkovich, mortgage servicing manager with Montana Housing.
Bonnie Craigie, RCAC.
Jody Paxton, executive director, Lake County Housing, Ronan.
Tyler Currents, Housing Solutions. Alex Burkhalter, Housing Solutions. Steve Demick, GMD Development.
Angela Heffern, Montana Housing.
Ginger Fan Cook, Montana Housing Accounting Finance Manager.
Vicki Bauer, Montana Housing Homeownership Program Manager.
John Wagner, QTAC Rock, bond counsel to the board.
Mina Chu, RBC Capital Markets, senior managing underwriter.
Gene Slater, CSG Financial Advisor. Drew Page, QTAC Rock, bond counsel to the board.
Patrick Zeng, RBC Senior Manager to the board.
Bob Rasmus, Montana Management Ventures.
Thank you. Those of you on the webinar, would you introduce yourself, please?
So it looks right now like we have Heather McMillan and Kelly Garigula on the webinar.
Thank you. As we always do, the first item on the agenda is public comments for any public matter that's not on the agenda and within our jurisdiction. Does anybody have any public comments in that regard? Hearing none, we can move on to the minutes of our February 11 meeting. Has everybody had a chance to review those, and do you have any comments or changes? Chair would entertain a motion to approve the minutes of the February 11th meeting.
I move to approve.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded to approve the February 11th meeting. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Okay, Mary, you're on the hot seat. Well, you're on the agenda. So.
Mr. Chair, board members, the first thing that we're going to talk about is additional credits. You guys wanted some direction or discussion about those. A year ago, or so, we put language into the QAP and I thought I got this in your packets, but I didn't.
You'd find it on page 10 of your packet.
Oh, it did get in there. Good. So that's the language that's in there. They have to submit a UniApp and the supporting documentation for the cost increases, for example, higher bids than expected material costs, et cetera. And then the staff does review and evaluate those materials and then present them for a recommendation. Present a recommendation at the board meeting. Staff will not recommend, and the MBOH board will not approve any increase beyond what that is necessary to make a project feasible. So there are some different scenarios that you can consider when there are additional credits. If there are additional credits or if there are credits that are not awarded as the first round, which is usually our only round, but those additional credits can go to a second round. Most likely would be a closed round, and the QAP allows for that, unless there are enough credits for a full project. If we do a closed round, those decisions will probably be made 2 to 3 months down the road from the original award. Those credits could be held until next year's credits are awarded. We then have 2 years credits, and that can be really confusing for developers, staff, and board members. If those additional credits from a previous year are not awarded before the credits of the next year, we technically are not eligible to apply for the national pool, which is approximately running between $10,000 and $15,000 a year. Doesn't sound like a lot of money, but that's $100,000 to $150,000 a year, and that adds up over time. The other option is what we've been doing. We can continue to award them as they become available. If a project returns credits, we can treat them as additional credits. That's the way QAP is at this time. The board could which means they could fall into any of those categories. When you award credits, if there's a fair amount left, or in case credits are returned, if you order the ones which we've done in the past, if you put the ones that aren't funded in order, then if there are enough credits to make a project financially feasible, you could allow staff or give staff permission to award those to the next project in line. So, questions for me?
Okay, is there any discussion from members of the board or questions of Mary? Please use your mic there.
Mary, can you tell me what a closed round would mean?
A closed round would mean that only the applicants in the previous round could apply.
Other discussion from members of the board? Questions of Mary? I will have more opportunity for that. Are there any comments from members of the public on this issue?
There's a mic over here.
There's a mic up here by the podium. Okay. Hearing no discussion or questions from members of the public. Is there anybody on the webinar who'd like to speak to this?
Star 2 to unmute.
Bruce, did you have a comment?
This is Kirk Bruce with Affiliated Developers. I don't have any comments. I mean, we just applied for the additional credits from the QAP from last year, so I don't know if that needs to be stated or not.
Well, there is, that is on the agenda for later in the meeting, so. But we're just discussing the general principle at this point in time.
So,
No problem.
so my sorry. So my comment comes with just kind of, technically, I just want to talk about kind of what staff does in any of these situations, I guess, and you'll see this here later when we get to the agenda item of the two projects that have asked for additional credits. But I just wanted to talk a little bit about, so board is aware that anytime we get a request like this, we do a complete review and underwriting of that project to make sure that the project meets all of our underwriting criteria. So, so when we bring these projects to you, if there is an issue with them, we will bring that forward and let you know. And if we're not bringing anything forward, really what that means is they've met all the criteria that any project has to meet in order to meet the requirements of the allocation plan. I think the next thing I just wanted to kind of say is I mean, I think there's positive and negatives to any one of these choices. I mean, I think, you know, if the credits are awarded ahead of time, you know, it's kind of a clean way to get the credits awarded. It allows, you know, a project to maybe move forward sooner than they might if they were to have to wait for a second closed round, or if they had to come in and ask for additional credits through a typical round. But, you know, then there's also negative to that those credits aren't available for those rounds too. So I think when you think about this, there may not be a particular perfect way of doing it, but it's just something that the board needs to think about as they consider these additional credits. So.
And we're giving you this as information. This has not been presented as an agenda item.
Right.
The award of credits is an agenda item.
Yeah, there's no action requested of the board here unless the board someone wants to make a motion and it's seconded and we proceed. Otherwise, things are as they are. Is there any further discussion, questions, or comments from the board?
Mr. Chair, it seems to me like a key point is how much, right? If we have, in this case, we have 31,000 or 310,000 over a 10-year period, and that yields a different discussion in my mind than if we had $1 million or something like that. So I just want to hold that out, that it's good to have these four options and to be able to say at any time, depending on the amount of credits available, we could make a decision that would vary from a prior decision.
Thank you, Sheila. I think that's an important point, and I feel similarly about it. Is there any, this is another opportunity for any member of the public to comment or ask questions regarding this matter? Okay, with that, we can move on to income averaging discussion.
Okay, this should be in your packet.
It's on page 6.
So I just gave you the federal information as we have in the past on this. And the plan that we have, first of all, when the 2020 QAP was done, because we didn't have direction from the IRS and because we didn't have software updates and those kinds of things, we put in the 2020 QAP that at this point, when we came up with the plans to deal with income averaging, that we put them into the compliance manual. And then when we do the 2021 QAP, we'll get them into the QAP. May go back and put them into the 2020 QAP at that time too.
Yeah, so we're looking to go through this, let you guys know what we're intending. If you have things that you'd like to discuss or maybe even change, we're open to that. I don't think it needs necessarily a motion, no. But I think there needs to be at least comments if there's things that you guys like or don't, and we'd appreciate that.
Okay.
And we probably may want to ask Mr. Chair that the public give comments as we go through this, maybe. Is that okay?
Certainly, I think what Mary has just suggested is as we go through this, if anybody from the public that's here physically or on the webinar, if you have any questions or comments as we go through this, pipe up.
Thank you. So the first thing is that the property needs to be 100% tax credit units, housing credit units, to be able to ask for the income averaging plan. And at least 50% of all the units must be affordable to and occupied by households earning 60% of AMI or less.
Yes, please, can you use the mic here?
And it may not be on.
Okay.
It is on. Okay.
Okay. Yeah, I have a quick question.
Please,
Oh, I'm sorry.
we need, for the record, please identify yourself.
I'm Bonnie Craigie with RCAC. I just have a quick question, Mary, and that is on the 60% units, is that at the time of their first lease up?
Yes, that's always the case with housing credit units.
Right. I just wanted to check. Okay.
Yep.
Thank you. Anyone else?
So Mary, the answer to that question makes me think that at first lease up, we have to apply this rule, but does it apply at any other time?
So income averaging, and that's probably in the stuff up above, but when they do income averaging, they designate each unit as a income category, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, or 80. And then that tenant needs to qualify for that targeting that has been designated for that unit.
So that applies at first lease up, right?
Well, it still applies down the road for every person who moves in.
Right. Okay. So I think you're going to cover this, but just to alert you, the idea of fixed units that are mapped versus floating units somewhere, if you want to address
That's
those.
in here. We are going to look at them as floating. It doesn't mean that somebody can't decide that they want to have them fixed, but we are proposing that they would be floating units.
Okay, so I just want to clarify. Floating would mean that if a unit was empty, it could be occupied by a 20% person, even though at the map said it was a 60%.
Yes, if it's lower than what it was designated as.
You can always
So
go
you
lower.
still have to have the right number of designated units with qualified tenants to meet the average.
But all times you'd have to meet the average every month. Okay, thank you.
Yep, or less, the average or less. Okay, resyndication, developers and staff know what that means, and it's one of those things that we throw out there periodically. Resyndication is a existing tax credit project that has come in for additional credits, or not additional credits, a new award of credits. So we've had the Palace in Missoula came in for a new award of credits. Also River Ridge. Franklin School technically was not a resyndication because it actually went out of the program. It wasn't a tax credit project at that time, and then so there's technicalities to it. It was a tax credit project for 15 years, and then in the 16th or 17th year or something like that, they came back in for credits.
So what's the rationale behind this rule?
When a lot of projects across the country passed their 15th year, some of the states decided that they would allow different targeting of those units in the extended use period. That ended up going to court because there are protections for tenants or potential tenants to be able to occupy that unit at the level or less that it was designated at. So it can become a legal issue. Now, if there were, this is a technicality, and we maybe need to talk about it. If there were market units in that property, then it's a possibility that they could do that because they would have some space in those market units to go at a higher rate. I will make a note of that. Excuse me.
Mary, since you brought up market units, income averaging can never apply to a mixed income project under this rule that you're
That is
proposing.
what we are proposing.
The rationale for that is it's
When you get into the next available unit rule on an income averaging project, it gets more and more complicated than it does on a other tax credit project. So properties that have already received their 8609s are not eligible to apply. Those designations on 8609s are not allowed to be changed. The IRS doesn't allow that. On existing projects, we put this rule in here early, and we're working with a couple of projects right now to get to income averaging. But 6 months before leasing up or moving tenants around the property in a rehab, they must request the income averaging. MBOH will try to get it back to them in 3 months. That time frame, not when we get these rules in place, is going to be a lot shorter than that. Management must be trained and on board before the request is made, as in they need to agree to take it on. To choose income averaging, an owner, applicant, or developer must submit a statement from other funding sources that the income averaging set aside will be compatible with the requirements of their programs, including Federal Home Land Bank lenders, home, etc., whatever they have involved. A statement from permanent lenders and equity provider, investor, acknowledging the selection of income averaging set aside. A market study or a revised market study that shows adequate demand for all possible combinations of unit sizes and percent limits selected. Designate units at a specific AMI by type. For example, 10 one-bedroom units at 50%. So designating both the percentage and the unit size at the time of application or the request to change the elections. The minimum set-aside election, which income averaging now is a minimum set-aside election. A matrix showing the percentages for each designated unit, updated UniApp sources and uses on Section C financial tabs. A lease-up plan. How are they going to get this done? Because they need to be cognizant that if something goes wrong with that lease up and they're trying to meet their minimum set aside, if they don't meet that maximum average, they could potentially lose credits because that's the minimum set aside for the project. Re-underwriting fee, we are suggesting $2,000. Management must be trained on income averaging and submit documentation of attendance and the agenda for the training. Management must also agree to deal with income averaging in writing, and a statement committing to annual income averaging training for on-site property managers.
Mary, I have a question on the fee. Is there a methodology to that price tag?
It's kind of hard to figure out what we're really going to have to do for this, but when we do the underwriting for the second and third underwritings for a tax credit project, it's $1,500 for a 10%, which is a partial re-underwriting. It's just some of the numbers, and then at 8609 we charge $3,000. It does take time, and we're going to have to go through market studies and the calculations and stuff.
So, Mary, part of this seems retroactive, that it'll only apply to those 2020, could a developer come in with a brand new application in the 21 round that would say we're going to use income averaging and avoid that fee, et cetera?
Correct.
So this is really for those, that
The
chunk
ones
of
that are
projects out there
that
that
have already been awarded credits, that want to change. We're suggesting that the average in Montana be 58%, 50, at or below 58%. Federal requirement is 68%, or 60%. It just gives a little wiggle room if something goes wrong.
That's what a lot of other states are kind of looking
Yes.
at too, isn't it? I mean,
A lot of these things have come from other states, by the way, that haven't gotten their plans together.
yeah, and there's kind of a working group where you've kind of accumulated a lot of this information, isn't that correct?
Yeah.
From other states.
Mhm. Properties with a reservation of credits must meet the average income targeting from the funding application, or 58%, whichever was less. So we would calculate the average on the units and the targeting that they chose in their application. And they would be at that average or 58%. Annual compliance fees will be $20 higher per unit. We'll be monitoring the property's compliance at least annually.
Mary, I just want to make sure I'm tracking here. So the 58% is the income threshold for the units?
No, that's the average of the, so let me review the income averaging real quick. Basically, it is the average of the designation of the units. So they designate some of their units at 40%, some of them at 50%, some of them at 60%, some of them at 70%. And the average of those percentages for those units is how we come up with that average number.
Is it a weighted average based on the number of units you have at, say, 40 and 50?
I always get confused when people start talking about weighted. So, I mean, it's...
I think it is.
Okay, thank you.
Everybody here all right?
Okay, where am I? Annual recertifications will be required on all units. Owners of developments with more than one building will indicate on Form 8609 to treat them all as part of a multiple building project, meaning that they would check yes on 8B. There is a choice. They have the opportunity to separate them out otherwise, if they want to, which means that each of those buildings is a separate project and the monitoring and the requirements change.
So Mary, I had a question about that. If a project is 4 and 9, that's two projects.
Those are two separate projects to start with, yes. Good question, thank you. Income unit designations must be equitably distributed among the bedroom sizes, other than a single unit per AMI limit if necessary due to odd numbers. And then the next one we have taken out actually in discussion, the average of rents must meet the average required or less. That is not the case. Designation of the units submitted will be submitted quarterly, and they will have to maintain the numbers of bedrooms and percentages that they put in the application. So the last sentence that you guys had on that page we took out. reporting, we took the average out of that they need to submit the rents probably on a spreadsheet quarterly. Rents on the 20% and 30% units will be capped at the maximum rent, including the subsidy. Rents on 50, 60, 70, and 80, 40, 50, 60. I left off the 40. The 40 would be so it would be rents on 40, 50, 60, 70, and 80 will not be capped, including the subsidy.
Yes. And I know you already identified yourself, but for the recording, would you could do it again? Thank you.
Bonnie Craigie with RCAC. So can you explain to me what you mean by this? I'm just a little confused on the capping.
So on a tax credit rent, you're allowed tax credit rent, the maximum rent, the amount that the tenant pays, plus the utility allowance, has to be below the maximum rent.
Mm-hmm.
In most situations, that subsidy does not get added into that figure.
Okay.
And we're saying on the 20s and 30s that subsidy will be added into that maximum calculation.
Okay. And on the 40s, if you had a subsidy, it would not be added into the calculation.
Correct. 40, 50, 60, 70, and 80. And this is only on income averaging.
Okay. I think I get it now. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah.
Thank you.
So Mary, is the rationale on this that we want those 20 and 30% families, if they have a subsidy, to
go into a 20 or 30 instead of a 50?
Correct.
Most often, the subsidy will cover at least a 50% rent. They can use the voucher payment standard, which is what those rentals, first vouchers, the rental subsidy is calculated on the voucher payment standard. That voucher payment standard is usually at 50, close to 50. Sometimes, depending on the area, it can go up higher than that, but yeah.
Mary, this is Heather. I'm on the phone. I raised my hand. I don't know if you guys can see it.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, no problem. I just had a question. So on the 20s and the 30s, when you say that the subsidy gets factored in, then am I capped at the 20% rent limits and the 30% rent limits within the program, including the subsidy?
Correct.
Okay, so we'll get less rent on those units, correct?
You will be able to get what you would get on a unit if it didn't have a subsidy.
Correct. So is there a rationale as to why we're doing that? And I only think about the fact that I can afford my mortgage on the Whitefish project because I have now 4 housing trust fund units, and I've had the housing authority take 3 precious vouchers and project-base them, and so we're getting less rent on one of the 30% units because we got additional housing trust fund and less home. And we're making it work, but it is definitely a big difference on affording the mortgage and stretching it and filling in the gaps from shortages on home and housing trust fund. So I guess, is there a reason why?
So first of all, this only applies to income averaging.
Right, we were considering income averaging for this project.
And
that's why I'm asking.
We want the people who are truly in a 20 and a 30% unit to be able to occupy those 20 and 30% units if they can't get a voucher. And historically, we see that those vouchers get plopped into the lowest income category. Those tenants do if those units are available. Mm-hmm. We don't want to see those tenants not have access to those units.
Without the voucher.
Correct.
Want them, right.
So if they have a voucher, you can put them into a 50. Pardon?
No, I see what you're saying, and I understand why you're trying to get there. it just complicates, the overall math on the mortgages and trying to stretch the credits further, but I understand why because there are only so many vouchers, want to be able to give that benefit, and we will have one on the Whitefish project, so.
Paula,
Okay.
remind me, what's the waiting list for the vouchers? 3 years, 4 years? Approximately? 3 to 4 years, and I think that the average is probably 2 to 3 years around the state. So there's a lot of people out there that can't afford
No, I agree. It's an interesting
into another unit.
approach it's an interesting approach to get it to get some of those units available. It'll just make the projects a little thinner, but if we're planning for it appropriately from the beginning, that makes sense.
And that doesn't that applies to your income averaging designation, not necessarily the designations that you have for other programs.
Correct.
Okay. 4%
Hello,
tax
this
exempt.
is Eileen Pecars of RCAC, and I'm on the phone.
Hi, Eileen.
Hi. I wondered if the rule on that could be different for project-based vouchers versus tenant-based. For example, if you have a 20% designated unit and you've got a project-based voucher that will always cover that unit, you move in a 20% person and you could collect the higher voucher rent rather than a very low 20% rent on that.
I think that's...
And that wouldn't eat up the units that I think you're trying to protect against by not letting tenant-based rent get put on those units and increase the rent.
I'm going to say let's talk about that at the QAP session, which is just a little over a month away. I don't think that I have all the information I need to answer that question right now.
Okay. Sounds good.
Thank you. Okay, 4% tax exempt bonds, 4% credit applications. The act did not change. This is just a precaution. The act did not change IRC 142, which includes multifamily housing bonds. However, these properties may satisfy both income averaging and one of the elections that they choose, which is almost always 40 at 60. They could still meet that 40 at 60. Montana Board of Housing will consider the units floating. If a targeted unit is offline, this is kind of some things that need to be thought about by developers. If a targeted unit is offline for UPCS, the average could easily go below the required percentage, or go above the required percentage. So if you have some 70s and the 20 is the one that's keeping that average down, and it's a MEF unit, which means it takes it offline, it's not occupiable, they can't claim the credits on it, that would push your average way up. Now, if there's a vacant unit, they could move somebody into that vacant unit, but they can't just change another unit to that percentage if the tenant that is in there doesn't qualify for that 20%. Lease-ups will need to be done to keep the 58% average or less. So don't rent your 70s first, because you never know what can happen in a lease-up. You know, things go pretty easily these days, but I remember the days when we used to, when developers would go down to the homeless shelter and get people to come occupy their units for no rent so that they could meet their minimum set-aside. And it's true. Yes, I'm not making that up. We're not in that situation now, but we never know when things can change. And all the above rules are subject to change and to adopt IRS direction or changes.
All right. Thank you, Mary. Any comments or questions from members of the board? Bruce, I see you have your finger up there.
Well, I just, I'm going to ask it as a question. I think I know the answer, but so right now, this isn't in the allocation plan. So effectively, staff could change this in the compliance manual if we need to, correct?
Correct.
Which is probably not a bad thing. I mean, we will bring anything we do back to you as a board for sure. I mean, you'll be fully aware of it. But I think that might be helpful in a sense that if we do find a technicality that just isn't working or fitting, there is a little bit of flexibility there, correct?
Yes, if we do keep it in the compliance manual, and that may be something to consider when I talked about putting it into the QAP, the 2020 or the 2021. If we leave it in the compliance manual, it does give us a much easier way to be able to adapt these rules to what the IRS does, or to this is not working at all, that we can change those, and then we would inform board members of what happened.
Yeah, I mean, we'd always do that. I think without a question, that's our normal process. So.
Thank you. Any other comments from members of the board? Sheila?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, Mary, thank you for all the work that you've done on this, and the rest of the staff as well. I really see this as significant and important, because in some ways, the worst situation a person can be in today is to be at 61% of area median income, because then they can't move into a tax credit project, but they can't really afford market rents. So what this does is allows some tenants to be at 70% or 80%, or up to 80%, I should say. And so it really helps those people that are kind of in that big gap there. At the same time, every time you have an 80% unit, you have to add a lower percentage, in the 20s. And so it sort of helps both ends of the spectrum. So I just want to thank you for moving in this direction, and I think it remains a really important piece. I don't think we'll get it perfect the first time, but hope that the building managers and the developers bear with us through this and help us perfect it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bob?
Just one more question. If I'm hearing this right, and I agree with Sheila that there has to be some flexibility there, but it sounds pretty overwhelming if you try to adopt any part of the rule retroactively. But moving forward, if I did a 20-unit project and I had 10 units at 80 and 10 units at 30, would I comply? That's 55% average. That's 55%
or less, as long as those designations of those units. So you would take the, what did you say, 10 units at?
Yeah, half the units were at 80% and half were at 30%.
Yeah, you would be at that average or less. And it's not the income of the person in the unit that we use to calculate that average. It's what you said that unit was going to be.
Bob, use your mic, please.
If the application actually declared it that way.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you. Good question. Are there other comments or questions from members of the board? Are there any comments or questions from members of the public?
And I'm sorry, one thing that that didn't get on here, and that there are several schools of thought out there right now on what income averaging minimum set-aside means. And we are at this point taking pretty much the most restrictive, which is 40% of the units have to meet the average of 60% or less.
Okay, with that, are there any comments or questions from members of the board? Comments or questions from members of the public?
This is Heather.
Heather, go ahead.
Yep, I was just going to say this is not simple, but we really appreciate you guys considering it and getting it set up and allowing staff the flexibility to kind of work with us on best practices. I think it's something that's helping a lot of projects across the country, and it will help in the very rural communities getting a larger bandwidth as well as making some of the larger projects work. So it's a great tool, and I look forward to discussing it at the QAP. So thank you.
Thank you, Heather. Go ahead.
Good morning. This is Steve Demick at GMD Development, and I too want to thank you guys for taking this on and considering it. It's as Sheila said, I can tell you firsthand on our project just a couple blocks south of here at Larkspur, we had so many people come in the door that were 62% or 63% that, you know, great potential residents we had to turn away. So, I mean, this is a huge new tool. And as you guys know, GMD has been focusing lately on 4% bond deals, which, you know, we think that's using that bonds is a huge resource that we think could be expanded in Montana. And you know, we've run so many numbers, you know, on every market here, and you know, I can tell you the feasibility is so super close that this tool, I think, is going to help us, you know, bring this to more places in Montana. You know, right now the bond program maybe works in Bozeman, maybe Billings, but maybe Missoula, Heather. But, you know, it could be expanded greatly, we think. And this would be a great tool. So kind of just speaking in support of income averaging in general. And I guess in general, it'd be great if we could keep it maybe just to the federal level and you know, until we kind of figure out what works, what doesn't work. And you know, we've really taken a lot of time getting up to speed on this, and I think everything you've laid out makes sense. And I mean, just a couple of things that I maybe consider. I see you have management certification or something. I'm not sure. I was trying to catch our manager before I came in. Maybe, you know, I don't know if there's like certifications, or I know there's webinars and things because it's kind of fast moving.
If they're doing a webinar online with any of the big companies, they get a certificate.
Okay. Then the other thing I noticed, I don't think in the federal level, and maybe others can add in, but you know, as far as distributing the percentages, I think what was your term? Equitably. I don't think that's in the federal level, and like I said, we're trying to squeak for feasibility, and the ability to maybe do a few more 3-bedrooms at 70 can even make the difference between the project working or not. So maybe ask you to consider some flexibility on that part. But you know, like I said, we've been to a lot of conferences, have done a lot of reading, and everything you've laid out, I think, is our rules being adopted by a lot of states and makes a lot of sense. So thanks again, and I appreciate your effort on this.
Thank you.
So there is no direction on the federal level at all at this point, really. That's why we put on here that those rules will change or may change to adopt whatever the IRS comes out with. And I suspect that as a lot of states are working through this, that there will be some best practices come out of this too. And hopefully the IRS will look at some of those before they start making rules or before they finalize rules. And sorry, one more thing, I passed this out to everybody. We came up with scoring for the 2020 for income averaging, and those percentages are pretty close to what would be calculated if you did the averages for the points above. These averages are pretty close to where those would land.
So is this what we'll be discussing at the QAP roundtable then too, or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but potentially this is
kind of
they're submitting their LOIs on Monday.
Yep.
And this direction doesn't give them a whole lot of chance to deal with that, but yeah. So
Okay, one more time, any comments or questions from members of the board? Any comments or questions?
Mr. Chair, I'm sorry, one more. If someone submits their LOI on Monday, do they have to make a income averaging declaration in that LOI?
It would be nice if they did, but we have worked these other rules in place for changes. So, yeah, with income averaging at this point, I don't remember what things we said couldn't change, but I think that during this process, as we're trying to get this program on board, that they should be able to do that.
Thank you.
Or maybe we need to talk about that they could decide, even if they came in for income averaging, they decide it's too complicated, they can switch back. Yeah. Yep.
Okay, any comments or questions from members of the public? Okay, I believe this is for discussion purposes only and no action is required. Is somebody on the phone?
Yep, sorry, this is Heather trying to weigh in, apologize.
Okay.
I was just going to Sheila's question. The LOIs, I mean, we're turning one in come Monday, and this was a very helpful conversation. We plan on just nodding to, if approved, we would utilize it on the project, and we will, by the time, if we were lucky enough to get an application, I'm assuming that all the underwriting would happen there anyway, but we'll nod to it in our LOI.
Thank you. Further comments or questions from members of the public?
This is Kirk Bruce, Affiliated Developers. Just wanted to piggyback off some of the other comments on the income averaging from a practical standpoint. Yeah, it is tough in some of these rural areas. We're working on a project now known as Niemont Manor Retirement Residence in Glasgow, which is a smaller town. And it's had some occupancy issues in the past, as it does now. And so one of the big hurdles that we're trying to overcome with our limited partners being comfortable with the project and investing their money is to make sure that the demand is there in the market study. And boy, this would be a huge help to have income averaging to sort of put us over the top here to preserve this acquisition rehab.
Thank you. Any further comments or questions from members of the public? My understanding, this is for discussion purposes only for the board, and you don't need any action from us?
Correct.
Thank you. That discussion is over. We can move on to the additional credit request.
Mr. Chair, board members, you have an agenda item in your board packet. Additional credit requests. The background, an email was sent out to board members and developers who had a current award of credits explaining there were housing credits available. The 1 year amount actually is $31,034. We're off $1. And the 10-year amount would be $310,340. On one calculation, we rounded up. On the other calculation, we rounded down. That's the fun of having different credits available at the same time. Okay, Meadowlark Vista is requesting the additional credits. They applied for Home Housing Trust Fund and Home for a total of $1,329,074. HTF was funded at $923. The home, they did not get the home funds. That reduces the sources of the funds by $406,074. The construction costs have increased by about $100,195. The total costs have increased by $21,019. And they raised their deferred developer fee to $169,306. So they did a lot to try and make this work without additional credits. Oakwood Village is requesting the additional credits. They performed a capital needs assessment for the application of the 19 credits. The property is using HUD financing. HUD required an additional CNA, and that CNA requires an additional scope of work. The construction costs have increased by $349,657. The total project costs have increased by $482,868. And they have raised their deferred developer fee $219 They're $219,368. The staff has reviewed and underwritten these requests, and that we request that the board consider the request for additional credits. If the board decides to move forward, staff recommends approving one project with the full amount of the additional credits.
Thank you, Mary. Discussion, questions from members of the board?
Mary, can you clarify, I mean, if either one of these projects gets these credits, then they're ready to move forward with their project, or are they still waiting for other funding to come through?
I believe that both of them, I think Oakwood is actually moving some now, and Meadowlark would be able to get moving.
Thank you. Bob?
What happens to the project that doesn't get credits?
I believe that they're both ready to submit an LOI on Monday for those additional credits. I can't say whether it would actually stop a project or not. I know there's some concern about that, but I don't know if it would actually stop a project or not at this point.
Other comments or questions from members of the board?
Mr. Chair, Mary, were both of these projects awarded credits in the same year?
Yes, this last round.
And I wonder if someone's here from Meadowlark that can tell us why they weren't funded for home dollars, or if they just haven't heard about home dollars.
This is Bonnie Craigie with RCAC, and I can tell you why we weren't funded for home dollars. It's a little bit of a snafu, as it was explained to us. When they reviewed the home applications, they were thinking we could just go in and get CDBG, and we had planned CDBG for our offsite. So that was a $450,000 request that we made to CDBG, which has been applied for now. But they said basically they were hoping we could plug the gap with CDBG and not home, and we couldn't. And so basically they just didn't realize that we couldn't plug the gap with CDBG, and thought that if they didn't give us home, we'd be fully funded. So that's what happened.
And I believe, Bruce, you can speak to this too, but I believe they had more applications than they've had in a very long time, and they ran out of money, just like we do.
That's actually good to know, because that home money's been hard to get out the door for a little while, so that's
Right.
good. But I'm sorry that Ronan didn't get that home. Thank you for that explanation.
Thank you. Any further comments or questions from members of the board? Any further comments, Bonnie, from the developer?
Good morning, Jody Paxton, Lake County Housing. As you may recall, in our application, we have 36 LIHTC units at Sparrow and Warbler Lane that have reached the end of the period of affordability, and we're going to be losing those. We've already got 4 vacancies that the owner is turning into home ownership. They're doing the rehab right now, and all tenants have been notified that at the end of their leases, they will be put on a month-to-month basis. So there will be no more leases in Sparrow and Warbler. Also, in addition, we asked for an update on our market study in anticipation of closing. And I didn't bring along my props this time because there isn't enough room in my jar for the M&Ms to show the additional need that was reported to us.
So I just want to, this is Bonnie Craigie with RCAC. I just want to stress a couple things. So if we get these funds, the additional tax credits, then the project is ready to go forward. And it's important that it goes forward this year because of the Sparrow and Warbler reductions in the units that are available in Ronan. You know, we're just losing units, and we don't have any place for people to go right now. So other than the long waiting list that the Housing Authority has. So that's just my last plug.
Thank you. Any more comments regarding Meadowlark Vista from developer? How about Oakwood Village? Pardon me?
Kirk is on the phone.
Kirk?
This is Kirk Bruce, Affiliated Developers, the developer, Oakwood Village. I would put ourselves in the same situation. I mean, we're ready to go, teed up and ready to go. I would remind everyone of the market study in Havre. We have a huge demand there. We have 100% occupancy. I think there's another project in Havre that's losing affordable housing units, and we want to make this project very, very nice, and the additional credits would make that happen.
Thank you, Kirk. Any other comments from in support of the Oakwood Village application? Bob?
I just had a question for the Oakwood. What were the additional scope of work requirements that HUD asked for?
There's a few different items. A lot of it was concrete work. I believe they had a larger number of concrete work they'd like to see done. We have galvanized plumbing, and all of the plumbing, or all the domestic lines are galvanized. They would like those replaced. I think we had in the original CNA, we had some interior units where some of the fixtures in the bathrooms were kept. They want those all replaced. There's a few other items. Unfortunately, I don't have it in front of me right this second. But
thank you. Any further comments or questions from members of the board at this point?
Mr. Chairman, so with either of these projects, kind of to the question, I guess, I think Sheila asked earlier to Mary, but I'd asked Oakwood and Meadowlark. So if you're not awarded these credits, what happens with the projects?
This is Kirk from Oakwood Village. Our anticipation would be to probably submit an LOI for the next funding round for the 9% credit, and or potentially submit a home application for maybe a phase 2. Our third option would be to go back to HUD and try to renegotiate on some of the CNA items, which can be done. It's just that it's not the easiest or most simple thing to do.
Thank you, Kirk. Monty?
Bonnie Craigie with Meadowlark Vista, RCAC. For us, it's a question of significant delays. I mean, it would significantly delay this project we'd be looking at a next year start versus a this year start if we don't get them. And I think that the other question is, what source do we find to plug these? We can submit an LOI, then we have to deal with our 10% test issues that come up this year or in March of next year, I guess. And that's a little bit concerning. I haven't looked exactly, but I think we might be able to squeak by. I'm not 100% on that. I would feel much more comfortable with credits this year. The other option would be to submit another home application in fall. And again, we're looking at having to start next year as opposed to being able to start this year and possibly have something open next year for the people that are leaving Sparrow and Warbler.
Thank you. Are there any comments or questions from any member of the public?
Pat, this is Heather with Homeward. Sorry.
Oh, yeah, I was just going to make one more comment. This is Kirk Bruce from Affiliated Developers. Yeah, we're in the same boat. We have to meet the 10% test, and obviously we would love to be able to close this year too. It puts a lot of stress on the project going down the road with LOIs and submitting home funds. So just wanted to make that clear.
Thank you, Kirk. Heather, did you have some comments?
I did. I just wanted to say that there were 3 projects in last year's round that fell into this complication. One project got additional credits in the December board meeting, and Whitefish was shorted home money, and Ronan was unable to get their home request or CDBG. Their Department of Commerce had funds, and I think they had a hard time wrapping their head around how much they had. And so there were several solutions. One, the additional credits on one project in December. We absorbed more housing trust funds, and we have one unit that charges less and is 30%, and we've absorbed that in some of our contingency cushion, and we think we're okay. And I sympathize with Ronan because right now new construction is terrifying on some levels, but we feel like we're safe. But I can imagine that Ronan could definitely use these, and I also empathize with Heather because I would imagine a CNA and HUD, they're not simple to deal with, but I just know from firsthand experience that we're all trying to reel from some shortages from the Department of Commerce, and yes, thankfully they were able to get their heads wrapped around it and funds out the door, but I support additional credits with either request, but sympathize with Meadowlark, and just wanted you all to know that we, 3 of us, were dealing with this for the last few months, and hopefully this will come to resolution today and help Meadowlark move forward, or an LOI next round. They weren't alone.
Thank you, Heather. Any other questions or comments from members of the public? Hearing none. Board, what's your pleasure? We have a hand raised. Who is it? Whitney?
Press star 2 to unmute your phone.
Thanks. I didn't know the audio command. Thanks for giving me a second. Hi, everybody. My name is Whitney Cantlin. I'm the director of Mission Mountain Enterprises in Ronan. And I just wanted to quickly share my observations of affordable, accessible, and safe housing options in Lake County. I grew up in Ronan, and I moved back here about 10 years ago. And I can attest that Lake County has and continues to experience a severe shortage of safe and affordable housing. As a nonprofit director, I've seen it firsthand. Limited housing options contribute to our workforce shortage issue. It's difficult to draw potential employees into the valley, knowing that they will likely struggle to find an affordable spot to land. MME supports individuals with intellectual disabilities, so we see the struggle for our clientele as well. Many individuals are working towards an independent life, which means living off-site out of our group homes. Most receive Social Security and work part-time, but without a long wait on Section 8, housing options are practically non-existent. Even with Section 8, it can be a challenge. So I was very excited when I heard about Housing Authority's plans to build the Meadowlark Vista complex, and I see the need for it. Jody informed me about the market study indicating that even more units would be needed, requiring the additional funding. So I joined today to ask you to consider this project for the additional credits. I think Lake County would benefit greatly from the support. And thank you for your time and letting me speak.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions from members of the public? Hearing none. What's your pleasure?
Mr. Chair, I move that the board award the additional credits to Meadowlark Vista and Ronan. I second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any discussion from members of the board?
Mr. Chair, it's a difficult decision. Now we have to do it twice a year. No, 3 times a year, because we have the LOIs as well. Both of them deserving. I'm for supporting the Meadowlark because of the market study that shows the need. This very board approved just a month or so ago the houses that are being taken out of a compliant, or not out of affordability because of the purchase option. We love that part. But it's significant when you have, in a community the size of Ronan, 15 units leaving the affordability arena. So I just believe that in the face of two very worthy projects, the one more worthy would be Meadowlark Vista.
Any further discussion, comments from members of the board? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
I think that was pretty much unanimous. Motion carries. Thank you. Mary, is that the end of your?
Update. We told you at the last board meeting that we hadn't heard anything from the Blackfeet on their compliance issues. They are moving on that. We have had some contact from them, and we do have information on who is actually the director of the housing authority up there. And they have completed about...
Mary, on that motion, I guess I should ask, we ask if everybody would signify if they were in favor of it. I think it's only appropriate to say, are there any opposed? Hearing none, motion carries. Thank you. It's a long night last night.
Anyway, they have, as of yesterday, had completed about 60% of the outstanding compliance issues. So that's really good news there. The other thing that I wanted to bring to your attention, the reverse mortgage has language that if a borrower passes away or is on or has left the home for 6 months, which is termed as permanent vacation, that, well, it's actually 180 days, but that the loan becomes due. Something has been brought to our attention recently, and we have a few loans in place already that have been done 3 or 4, well, longer than that ago. Anyway, that a potential borrower went to the counselor, and the counselor called us. This is a single parent with a disabled child. And her concern was, what happens if she goes to assisted living? That would leave him or her in the house. 6 months is a really short time period to try and take care of something like that. And we are realizing that that 6-month period is really short anyway. If someone's deceased and there's not, well, if someone's deceased and there's any assets at all, it is a pretty long period to actually get that, or that's a pretty short period to get those things done. So we would like to try and think about a way to expand that period for to take care of getting that loan paid off.
This is an administrative rule, so I think it's something that maybe what board members would think about as we look at adjusting administrative rules later in the year.
The permanent vacation rule is in the administrative rules, if the borrower passed away, that is, I believe, is in the statute.
Mary, are you asking for action from the board, or you just advise?
No, I'm not asking for action. I'm looking for a little advice maybe, or to let you know that this situation has come up and that we may be trying to do something different. And at the end of the day, if we need to change the arm, that would be board action and would probably happen when we're revising arms with the QAP.
All right, thank you. I know you have a dashboard in the agenda. Is there anything you wanted to highlight on that?
No.
Anything further from multifamily?
No, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to call for like a 10-minute break so that if anybody hasn't checked out, now is the time to do it. And if you'll be back here at 5 minutes to 10, we will finish up our business. Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, members of the public. I am Ginger Van Cook, the Accounting and Finance Program Manager. You have my dashboard in the packet. And Paula, if you scroll down just to, there we go. The first section of the dashboard shows the investment proportions for the month of February. We didn't have the March numbers as yet, but they remain approximately the same. As you can see, the biggest proportion is still in money market. The investments for the longer and short-term investments such as Fannie Mae, FHLB, are still at such a low rate that it just hasn't been an advantageous investment to put into any of those items. If you'd scroll down just a little further, the weighted average has dropped back down a little bit. It's remaining very, very much the same there over time. We haven't seen a huge difference there, and part of that is just because so much of our investments is in that money market. The portfolio maturity, of course, because the money market is available now, the highest percentage of our our portfolio is available now. We still have some out 16 to 20. That's actually been there for several years before my time, actually. We do have some in the 6 to 10 that we have locked in some time ago. The next page does break out the maturities within the different investments. Yeah, Paula, if you could go to the very next page. It doesn't want to. But it does list all of the investments out so that you can see what we actually have invested with Wilmington Trust, U.S. Bank. The Wilmington Trust investments are for our single-family investments, and the U.S. Bank investments are our multifamily investments. So if you have any questions on that, please let me know. We are planning on trying to get you a little more information on future dashboards that will help you see not just investments, but some of our other data.
Thank you, Ginger. Any questions of Ginger? Any comments from members of the board? Any comments or questions from members of the public? Thank you, Ginger. We'll move on to home ownership.
Good morning. The first item on the agenda this morning is an update really to simplify the way we do our set-aside program. Our set-aside, lender pool set-aside is established to provide first mortgages for borrowers that are 80% or lower of area median income who qualify for down payment assistance from other partner programs, other nonprofits, or loans from an approved program such as HUD 184. These loans have been being purchased with pre-almond and combined revenue funds, and the rate is currently set at 3.75. In the past, the board has always allocated a certain amount of funds to purchasing these set-aside loans. What we'd like to do is, because the set-aside program really is has become a permanent part of the board's offering to its lenders and the borrowers throughout Montana. What we'd like to do is change the way that it's approved and managed. So we had received cash flows from RBC about a week ago, and when we received it and we reviewed it, we had been buying the set-aside loans with the combined revenue funds, and what we had initially decided was that we would set a floor on the set-aside request, that a floor be set on the set-aside loans of 4.25, and I am going to change that up just a little bit today based on some conversations that we've had. What we'd like to do is set the set-aside rate, hinge it to the regular rate, and just have it set at 25 basis points below the regular rate. Currently, the regular rate is 4.25%, and we don't necessarily feel like we have to set a floor, because if we hinge it to the regular rate, it opens up as an option for us of being able to fund those loans out of regular bond issues rather than using like pre-almond or combined revenue funds. And so we can structure the pricing, structure the bond pricing to accommodate a 0.25% lower rate on the set-aside loans. So the staff's going to request today that moving forward, we set the set-aside rate, hinge it to the regular rate, and have it be a 0.25% below the regular rate. And instead of having the board regularly allocate funds, just let staff manage the set-aside program with using whatever funding source we have available or works best for the program at the time.
Thank you, Vicki. Are there questions or comments from members of the board?
I like it.
Mr. Chair, I worked for a long time for an organization that used a lot of these loans, and this is the lowest income borrowers that the board uses. They have to be below 80% of area median income. They often qualify, almost always qualify, for a home down payment. But 0.25% or even 0.125% can make a big difference in the affordability of that house. So my question is, Vicki, what if we went a little deeper? What if we said it was 3/8 or a half on the hinge rather than 1/4? Does that take it out of the bond program? We can't do it exactly as you're proposing, or what happens there? And you might want to ask for some help on that. I would.
So from my perspective, just and experience with the board, I think it makes it a little bit harder possibly to fund it at a regular bond. I wouldn't think that it would be impossible, but it does make it a little bit more difficult just because the percentage of loans that we do in the set-asides, I looked at the 2018, calendar year 2018, and the dollars that we spent on set-aside loans was at about 15% of the other first mortgages that we, or 15% of the overall first mortgages that we financed last year. We've seen it a little bit higher because part of it also depends on the partners, what monies they have available, Home Start, how much they have available for down payment assistance for the borrowers. So I would say it's about 20% of an issue. And so our DPA rate right now is set 0.25% above regular rate, or that's where it starts. With the Score Advantage program, it goes up a little bit higher than that incrementally based on the borrower's credit score. We will be doing some analysis to look at the DPA and make sure that it's structured appropriately with the financial advisor with CFG. So, and if Mina or Patrick or Jean have comments, I'm sure.
I was going to ask if our financial advisor, underwriter, or bond counsel want to weigh in. Now's a good time to do that. Mina, could you come to the mic?
So that would be my question, because it would seem that the 4.25% rate would either need to be higher, possibly, or it would need to burn off zeros or some other subsidy in order to maintain. But I'll let Mina confirm.
Hi, this is Mina Chu with RBC. Some of that is market driven. Some of your pre-Allman bonds have been locked in, and it's pretty low, but until recently, you've been doing your set aside at 3 1/8 or so, which is extremely low, historically low. If and when rates do go up and market rates are at 6 or 7 or higher, it gives you a lot more flexibility because you have locked in more certain bonds at 3% or 4%. So recycling at higher loan rates, higher than what you've already locked in, if you're going to be recycling with pre-Allman funds, that would be icing on the cake. But right now, with such rate compression and historically low rates, it's a little bit difficult to go much below that.
So I'm going to ask you, Nina, to define a little bit difficult.
Well, we went through yesterday some of the profitability analysis. So we were talking about as comparison to certain other agencies, you do a lot more work, but it costs your bottom line, your profitability.
Vicki, you and I in the past have had a conversation about how because these borrowers often qualify for home dollars, and in the home in the state and as well as in the cities, there's home dollars available for down payment assistance. So I'm wondering if we used fewer of our flexible funds for the zero down payment and had those borrowers qualify for home, use that money, and then if we could offset that, this can't be answered today, I understand that, but we would be doing fewer down payment loans, zero down payment loans, because these borrowers would still get down payment assistance, but they'd get it through the home funds, which are available in every community in the state through NeighborWorks Montana. I just, again, I'm trying to support an argument for slightly lower first mortgage rates, and I'm trying to find the money to fund it, and this might be a possibility.
And I think one thing we'd have to look into on that is the borrowers that are currently utilizing our DPA, what the income is of them, because our DPA programs aren't restricted to 80% of area median income. Any of our borrowers can utilize our down payment assistance. So I just have to take a look and really understand what the income level of the borrowers utilizing our DPA to know whether or not we'd have to implement a new rule over our DPA that income restricts those borrowers or not.
Gene, did you want to?
We've just been talking with Vicki, and actually I've just been outlining a couple of approaches for thinking about this. But it seems that the broader problem that you want to solve is how can you expand your overall lending without reducing your spread, below what it is. That's sort of the big picture issue. And here using regular bond funds instead of pre-Allman does a couple of things. So for borrowers who are getting DPA, or getting home fund, the DPA, they're effectively 50 basis points below. There would be effectively 50 basis points below the borrowers who are getting regular DPA from the board, right? So that's a big differential. And I think while we look, this seems like a good starting point given the volume and the mix, but we could look at, one of the things this does is it frees up pre-Allman funds to be used for non-first-time home buyers to expand lending. And we ought to look at generally how the amount of DPA we can do, how can we use DPA to expand lending. So I think this is part of a broader thing, but this seems like an easy way to do the special lending now at a level that seems, to Mina and I, and Vicki, all, sort of adequate and safe before we know more. That would be my reaction.
So, Mr. Chair, just one comment then. So I'll be happy to vote for this motion. But I would want to say that I'd love to see this study and see if we can do it with lower first mortgages. I understand.
I hear you.
But so if we can say this is for now, but we'll look at it again in 6 months or a year, that would be very wonderful. So thank you.
Are there further comments or questions from members of the board? Comments or questions from members of the public? Do we have a motion?
I'd be happy to move approval.
A second.
I just want to give one clarification. On the proposal that I had put into the board packet, I had stated that we raised the rate to 4.25% and set that as the floor. So I would like to scratch the first sentence out of my proposal and have it be that going forward, the set-aside rate will be hinged to the regular rate, set at 25 basis points lower than the board, and the board will no longer have to allocate a specific amount to the set-aside pool.
Jeanette, is that your motion? And Johnny, that's your second?
Yes.
All right, further discussion, questions from members of the board? Any comments, questions from members of the public? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. Motion carries. Thank you.
And Vicki, I do have one quick question. Will that happen ASAP?
It will. And then also in your board packet, you will see the homeownership program dashboard. The usual items are listed on the dashboard, although I did make a couple of changes in the middle of the section where it talks about the changes in the portfolio. I added a year-to-date column, so not only the the monthly figures, but also what's happened since the beginning of the calendar year. And then on the second page, you'll see I added a section for the loan purchases by lender. I broke that out by first mortgages as well as DPA, and added a year-to-date field so that on a monthly basis you can see which lenders are participating in the program and the number of loans that they're originating on behalf of our borrowers. And then the other items are the usual, the breakdown of the portfolio by mortgage insurer, and then the lender and partner outreach. And part of that I just wanted to point out, this year we've been working with Encompass, which is a loan origination system that a lot of the lenders use. And what we're trying to do there is we're trying to get our specific bond docs loaded up on the loan origination systems to make that lending process a little bit easier for the lenders that we're working with, that are working with our program. And so if there's any questions on that, I'd be happy to answer. Otherwise, that completes.
Thank you, Vicki. Any questions or comments regarding the homeownership program dashboard? Any questions or comments from members of the public? Thank you very much.
Okay.
And we're moving on to mortgage servicing.
Good morning. Okay, we will just be going through an update on the servicing dashboard with some of our numbers. And since I kind of have some numbers back since July of 2014, we had about 3,400 loans. And now I've been looking into our March 31st, we have about 5,200 loans. So we've grown about 2,000 loans in the last few years, and hopefully we'll just keep on moving forward with that. And also, principal balance is approximately $490 million. We do have escrow about $4.7 million balance, and our lost draft funds about $552,000. As far as our delinquent loans, I feel that we are getting a more experienced loss mitigation and early delinquency team, and they've been working really hard on their persistence and consistency in their calls and reaching out to our borrowers. It shows here in February we've had 162 loans over 60 days past due, but just this last month we dropped that down to 134. And also with foreclosures, I looked back, I think it was 2017 in March, we had 8, and right now in March, we just had 1. So total in the year of 2019, we've had 3 foreclosures. We had 58 in foreclosure last year, 2018. We have reinstated 33, which ended up with 25 that actually went to foreclosure last year. So we did work really hard on reinstating and canceling 33 foreclosures, which is pretty good. Also, with the delinquent contacts to make, in 2017 we had approximately 720, and this last February we had about 663. So that's really gone down as well. And also our late fees, 702 loans that had late fees, $19,356 income. Our payoffs are less than our new loans at this time as well, which is always good. As far as more of our loss mitigation, we have 3 financial packets in-house to review. We've got 20 repayments and forbearances. We've had 2 short sales in March just recently, and partial claims, we have 4 partial claims processing right now. And preservation properties, we did let one go last month, and so now we have 10 in REO and preservation. And let's see, Chapter 13 bankruptcies, we have 23. And I just wanted to share a little bit of what servicing does. And it's based on our borrowers, how they experience hardship. It can be temporary or permanent. And during these hardships, our borrowers can experience many things such as substance abuse, spousal abuse, divorce, death in the family, bankruptcy, illness of a loved one. And we work very, very closely with their needs. And during these times, you know, we also share community resources and direct them to real estate professionals, you know, attorneys that may help them, also, you know, counselors if needed. And we do have a little bit of a success story. There are a few servicers that service HUD 184 loans, and about 1% of our portfolio is HUD 184. And we recently had success with a borrower in Lame Deer who lost her husband in November of 2016. And while we were working with them on working with her, or actually them on a repayment plan, that's when he had passed away, and she was left to care for 2 boys on her own. And it's taken her over a year and a half, you know, since her husband's death to bring this current, and she's near current. I think we have like 1 or 2 more months to go, and we call her every month to see how she's doing, and she continually thanks us, and you know, many times to say, you know, she appreciates how we worked with her, and I just think it was a great success story. So that's everything I have.
Thank you. Any comments or questions of Mary from members of the board? Hearing none, are there any comments or questions from members of the public? Thank you, Mary. Cheryl?
Thank you.
Morning. Cheryl Cohen, Operations Manager. So just referring to the Operations Dashboard in your packets will be pretty quick. The next board meeting will be held Monday, May 20th and Tuesday, May 21st in Helena at the Delta Marriott. That's where we'll be hearing the Housing Credit Letter of Intent presentations and moving forward on which projects would be invited for full application. An in-state board training is available at the June 17th through 19th Housing Partnership Conference. Please contact Paula and I if you would like hotel reservations. We'll be booking those on behalf of board members.
So we'll be having a board meeting that Monday too.
Okay.
So probably if you want to stay for the conference.
There are a couple other out-of-state trainings available. The Mountain Plains Regional Subminute. Right now, I don't think we have anybody that's planning to attend from the board, and the NCSHA conference in October. Right now, we've got Pat, Eric, and Amber. It looks like I neglected to update the staffing section. We did hire Ryan Baker for our Mortgage Loan Compliance Program Specialist. He was formerly with our multifamily program. And that resulted in an open spot in our multifamily program, which Brian Lundeen, who was with our accounting program, slid into. And so now we have one vacant position in our accounting program, which we believe was going to get posted on Monday or Tuesday. So I talked with both Brian, and they both seem very enthusiastic about their new positions, and we're really glad to have them stay with Montana Housing. Procurement, we issued an RFP for a GSE and Ginnie Mae consultant in late February. We received one proposal that met our requirements from Acorn Mortgage Consulting. And we have now closed that process, and we executed a contract with Luana from Acorn Mortgage Consulting. And finally, we continue to work on our GSE seller server project plans. We've identified our initial scope of work and are striving to resubmit to Fannie Mae and to concurrently become Freddie Mac approved. We do have an upcoming meeting with Gina from Freddie Mac on April 25th. She's going to be in town in Helena. And we also have a call scheduled with Fannie Mae on April 29th. Any questions?
Thank you. Any questions or comments from members of the board? Any question or comments from any member of the public? Hearing none. Bruce, Director's update.
All right. So just an update on legislative stuff. We went over some of this in our training yesterday, but just an update. House Bill 16 passed out of the Senate yesterday on third reading. It was something like 30 to 19 or something was the vote. And House Bill 527 passed out of the Senate yesterday. I forget what the vote was. House Bill 16 will now go to conference committee more than likely. House Bill 527 wasn't amended, so it should just pass through to the governor. The other ones have already kind of passed out, I think. I haven't heard about 376 yet, so we'll keep you updated on that one. Other than that, we'll get you more information on the May meetings as we get it, so look forward to that. And I think that's it.
Thank you.
The one thing though that you guys can look at, the last dashboard is Section 8 dashboard. So this is kind of there for your information, just kind of on where we're at on lease ups and the different programs we have there. So if you did have any questions on it, I'll try to answer them, but otherwise just use that as your information.
Thank you, Bruce. Any comments or questions of Bruce?
36 to 14 on 16. So.
Hey, we've never been here before. Yes, Skippy. This is our 8th legislative session, trying to get some money out of the state of Montana for housing. Bruce, one thing that would be helpful to be added to the dashboard is waiting lists. I don't think that's on there anywhere, but if that would be that'd be good to know. And thank you.
We'll do that. Paula actually handles a lot of that for us, so she'll be able to give us some good information.
Okay. Any comments or questions from members of the public of Bruce? Okay. Anything else, members of the board? With staff, just want to tell staff, good 2 days. Thank you for all the work you put into it, and our consultants as well. Very, very helpful information. Thank you.
Agreed.
Thank you. If no one objects, we will adjourn the meeting. Bob?
Mr. Chairman, I had one just short item based on the last conversation we had yesterday, giving it a lot of deliberation. I think that we need a formal process for public comment that isn't made for the record. In other words, I don't think any of our staff should be burdened with disgruntled applicants or, I don't think that's fair to the staff. I think there should be a process, a form that can be filled out if there's somebody that's unhappy with actions of the board or wants clarification, so that we can deal with it in something more than just a he said, she said kind of thing. And I don't know if that's possible, but I would like to ask that maybe we look at a process so that people do, if they truly feel that there is, something that wasn't quite right or issue. It would be a lot better to provide a written request for additional information or response than to, battle it out politically, I think.
Bruce and maybe Cheryl, can you maybe
we'll
bring
look
us
at
back
that.
something?
We'll kick that around a little bit, Bob, and try to come back with some suggestions maybe for you guys to consider.
Thank you. With no objection, we will adjourn the meeting. Meeting's adjourned.
Thank you, everyone.